So when we're looking at this play, it's important to get the characters straight because there's a little bit of, kind of like identity confusion things that happen. And so we're looking at the characters of Jack Worthing. Now, Jack is a character who has invented an alter ego, and he has invented his brother, Ernest, who lives in the city. Jack lives in a country manor, like what's being depicted on the screen there. And when he gets bored or whatever, he goes into the city and pretends to be Ernest. He's got like his other little life that he lives. And then he comes back to the country. He just sort of goes back and forth. Now, this is the whole thing is Oscar Wilde making fun of the upper class and making fun of the way that they run their lives and what they occupy themselves with and how they fall in love and how they decide to get married and all of those things. So Jack, the fact that he's got two different identities and time to do that indicates that he's of the upper class. The Victorians, started to realize that they had a lot of time on their hands. If they'd made a lot of money or their family had a lot of money through inheritances, off the backs of the working class, then they weren't busy during the day. They didn't go to work. So how do they occupy their time? That's what Oscar Wilde's making fun of in this play. And so you have Jack and you have Algernon, who is his best friend. And in Act One, they're having a conversation about the woman that that Jack is in love with. Of course, he's Ernest in town, and that is Gwendolyn. So Jack is in love with Gwendolyn and wants to propose to her, but he has to get the approval of Lady Bracknell, who is Gwendolyn's mother. And so there's a whole topic of marriage and the social conventions of getting married and, that sort of thing. Asking for permission. She asks him a bunch of questions in Act One about his beliefs, and, Oscar Wilde's making fun of sort of like the, I don't know, third degree that a parent would make of somebody in the Victorian era to make sure that they're suitable for their child. In any case, as these rich people are involving themselves, they tend to make drama. I mean, what happens when people are bored? They make drama. So that's pretty much what happens in this play. Jack, Ernest in town in London, invites Gwendolyn out to his country home, and because he wants to propose marriage to her. But Algernon, his friend, has never been to his country home and seen him as Jack. So he takes note of the address, and in Act Two, he goes out and starts creating some trouble by pretending to be Jack's brother, Ernest. Hopefully you're following that. We'll see that in the act today that we're going to watch. But just the idea that these people have this much time on their hands to create these alternate identities and, have these conversations with each other about who they should marry and all that stuff is being poked fun at. And you can see that I put some topics here of this particular satire. Marriage is made fun of, and you'll see even more of that in Act Two because Oscar Wilde makes fun of the fact that people didn't really get to know each other before they got married in the upper crust. It was like, oh, do you have the right answers to my questions? And so what will happen is you'll see in Act Two how Cecily Cardew is Jack's ward. And you should have looked up ward. I put that on for last week. So he's sort of like her adoptive parent in a way. He's looking out for her and making sure she gets an education from Miss Prism. And you'll see that Cecily is, when she meets Algernon in the form of Ernest in Act Two, she says, well, we've been engaged for a while, and she already has carried out this imaginary engagement with Ernest. And so you'll see in that scene how Oscar Wilde's making fun of the institution of marriage, making it almost as, a fly-by-night sort of thing. She meets him for the first time. Of course, it's Algernon pretending to be Ernest. And she says, well, we've already been engaged for a while. I already gave myself a ring and a bracelet token and all that sort of stuff. So Oscar Wilde's making fun of marriage through that. Also Victorian morality and gender roles. The idea of the dandy, if you read the note on that before you looked at Act 1, both of these men, Jack and Algernon, are very much dandies. They're very preoccupied with their clothing, how they look, their gloves, and maybe in a feminine kind of way to our standards. But so gender roles are also kind of, you know, topsy-turvy in some ways. Cecily has already proposed marriage to herself in the form of her imaginary Ernest. So she's taken on a male role in that sense. And so there's this sort of mixture of the gender roles that happens in this piece. There are some things that you can track to help you kind of stay focused on the main elements of the play, and I listed those over here. Deception, particularly with identity, but deception is prevalent throughout the piece, specifically with Jack and Algernon. Identity is something that is in question throughout the play. In Act 3, there are some surprises. I'm not going to do spoilers, but there are some surprises about identity that come up to kind of like wrap up the play at the end. But, you know, is Jack Earnest? Is Algernon Earnest? Algernon has his own like identity that he creates, Bunbury, who he goes to see in the country, his friend, so that he can get away. So there's just a lot of this back and forth with their identity and hypocrisy. They both want to get baptized. City versus country, there's a lot of that too, the identity that you have in the country versus the identity that you have in the city. Wit over truth, it's better to be clever than honest. By the way, earnest is a word that's a name, but it's also just a word. Earnest, to be earnest means to be honest and forthright. And so when Oscar Wilde names the play The Importance of Being Earnest, sometimes he's talking about the name Ernest, because Gwendolyn wants to marry Ernest because his name is Ernest. I always just thought that I would be married to a man named Ernest. So it's not about anything else than his name, which isn't even his name. So there's that sort of, you know, paradox, but also the importance of being earnest or honest, right? The importance of being honest, which is also being mocked in this play. And of course, love, because there are two romantic couples that come out of this play. And you could also almost see Miss Prism and Dr. Chasuble. I didn't put him on the character list over there, but he's the country minister. He'll come out in Act 2. And they kind of have a little flirtation going on too. So there's that element of Victorian flirting that happens. So is there anything about Act 1 that you have questions about before we look at Act 2 together? No? Okay, I'm gonna go to the play. Here's Algernon, right? And he's happy right here because he has just sort of secretively found out the address to, this is Jack or Ernest. In the scene, he's Ernest because this is Gwendolyn and she thinks she's in love with Ernest, but his name is really Jack. And he has just told her his address in the country saying, oh, you should come out, bring your mother. And, you know, because he's pursuing her. And Algernon just overheard the address. So he's going to go make some trouble and travel out to the country to Jack's estate and pretend to be Ernest. So what's Jack going to do when his fake brother really shows up out there is what happens in, or part of what happens in Act 2. Act 2 is a little bit long. It's about 40 minutes. So I'm going to start it now. And I'll stop maybe once or twice just to point a couple of things out. And then we'll wrap it up for today. So let me see, I have to turn off. Last week I messed up and I, in one of my classes, I was really messing up the video a lot. So I have to concentrate. Let's see. Okay. Start this. So we're picking up here in Act 2.
Yes, Miss Prism? Cecily! Come here at once, child. We should have been at our labours quite 20 minutes ago, Cecily. Unfortunately, I was detained by a slight mishap to my oh, well, never mind that yet. Your German grammar is on the table. But I don't like German. It isn't at all a becoming language. I know perfectly well that I look quite plain after my German. Oh, child, you know how anxious your guardian is that you should improve yourself in every day. He made particular stress on your German as he was leaving for town yesterday. Indeed, he always lays stress on your German when he's leaving for town. We will repeat yesterday's lesson. Genders. Dear Uncle Jack is so very serious. Sometimes he is so serious that I think he cannot be quite well. Your guardian enjoys the best of him. And his gravity of demeanour is especially to be commended in one thing, comparatively young as he is. I know no one who has a higher sense of duty and responsibility. I suppose that is why he often looks a little bored when we three are together. Cecily, I'm surprised at you. Mr. Waring has many troubles in his life. Idle merriment and triviality would be out of place in his conversation. You must remember his constant anxiety about that unfortunate young man, his brother Earnest. I wish Uncle Jack would allow that unfortunate young man, his brother Earnest, to come down here sometime. Diminutives are always neuter. That is, they belong to neither sex, even when appearances are to the contrary. As, for example, das Fräulein, the young lady, das Mädchen, the young girl. Put away your diary, Cecily. I really don't see why you should keep a diary at all. I keep a diary in order to enter the wonderful secrets of my life. If I didn't write them down, I should probably forget all about them. Memory, my dear Cecily, is the diary that we all carry about with us. Yes, but it usually chronicles the things that have never happened and couldn't possibly have happened. I believe that memory is responsible for nearly all the 3-volume novels at the library's ENGL. Do not speak slightingly of the 3-volume novels. I wrote one myself in earlier days. You really, Miss Prism? Oh, how wonderfully clever you are. I hope it did not end happily. I don't like novels that end happily. The good ended happily and the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means. I suppose so. And was it ever published? Alas, no. The manuscript, unfortunately, was abandoned. Oh, I use the word in the sense of loss, mislaid. Now, do your work, child. These speculations are profitable.